The Batman vs. Superman Easter eggs that flew over your head. With a running time of 2.5 hours, Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice has a lot going on. We've gone over all 153 minutes with a fine-toothed comb and picked out the best and biggest Easter eggs to give you hints of what to look for in the movie. Here's a spoiler-filled guide to all the DC Comics goodies peppered throughout the film. One more time, for anyone who's not paying attention, major spoilers ahead. Still here? Great. Let's dive in. Darkseid is coming. Bruce Wayne's nightmare vision, which occurs while he's asleep at his bat desk, hints at something major looming on the DC movie horizon. Fans of the comics will recognize the flying creatures in this scene as parademons, the nasty comics creatures who serve the intergalactic uber-villain known as Darkseid. You can also see Darkseid's Omega symbol carved into the ground at the beginning of Bruce's vision, and Luthor seems to directly reference his impending arrival when he threatens he's coming at the end of the movie. But that's not the only hints of Darkseid's presence we get out of Batman vs. Superman. Mother Box. When Wonder Woman takes a tour through Lex Luthor's meta-human files, we get our best looks yet at the future members of the Justice League, including the Flash, Aquaman, and Cyborg. In particular, Cyborg's origin, told via lab footage that shows him being, booted up for the first time, has even more to offer fans than just the beginnings of a major superhero. That's because we get a look at what seems to be a Mother Box, a super powerful supercomputer ripped right from the pages of Jack Kirby's New Gods saga. Just like Batman's vision of the future, the Mother Box has major ties with Darkseid and the aliens of New Genesis and Apocalypse. Since it looks like Cyborg's creation has direct ties to New Gods technology, just like the new version of his origin in the comics from 2011, expect the hero to play a pretty big role in the DC Extended Universe. Riddle me this. Batman's troubled past is felt more than seen or discussed in Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice. But Snyder's fondness for referencing comics lore can be seen in the building where the showdown between the two heroes goes down. If you look carefully, you can spot what looks a lot like some graffiti left behind by the Riddler, or perhaps some of his henchmen. Might we see him in future DC movies? And will Jim Carrey reprise the role?
Joygasm!
KG Beast. Lex Luthor has a high-ranking henchman in Batman vs. Superman named Anatoly Knizia, played by Callan Mulvey, and although he doesn't look anything like he does in the comics, DC fans will recognize that as the real name of the villain known as KG Beast. Could we be seeing Knizia in a different form later on? Considering his fate in this movie, getting exploded after Batman shoots at the flamethrower he's wearing on his back, it's a good bet that he'll be more inclined to wear something closer to his comic book costume in future appearances. Assuming, of course, he hasn't simply been incinerated. Mercy Graves. That's no ordinary employee bringing Zod's corpse to Lex Luthor. Fans of Superman the Animated Series will recognize the character of Mercy Graves, played here by Tao Okamoto, Luthor's personal assistant and bodyguard. She became a fan favorite during the run of the series, and it's exciting to see her brought to the big screen in such a major movie. Of course, unless we misunderstood the scene where she's inside the Senate building that explodes about halfway through the movie, we might not get much more Mercy in future DC film flicks. Ah well. Metallo. Before the movie came out, it was rumored that Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice would feature an appearance by Metallo, the comics villain who goes from life as a soldier to a life of crime after having his body rebuilt with kryptonite-powered cyborg parts. That didn't quite happen, probably because of how many other details were crammed into its running time. Yet, if you watch the closing credits, you'll see that one of the technicians demonstrating the effects of kryptonite in Luthor's lab is named Emmett Vale, which just happens to be the name of the scientist who built Metallo. Watch for the Metal Man to make his debut in a future DC Extended Universe film. Jimmy Olsen. As much fun as Zack Snyder clearly has calling back to the comics, he isn't above changing things up when it suits him. Case in point, Jimmy Olsen's brief and ultimately tragic cameo in Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice. Early in the film, when Lois travels to the fictional country of Nairobi, Africa for a story, she's accompanied by a photographer who turns out to be a CIA spoof and is quickly put to death by the warlord she's interviewing. According to remarks Snyder made during his press tour for the film, that's actually Jimmy Olsen. Although Snyder didn't think there was any room in the DC cinematic universe for him, the director decided putting one of Superman's best friends in the movie and killing him off would be a way to have fun with the character. Zod of Kandor. We saw a return from Man of Steel's bad guy, General Zod, albeit in the form of a corpse, and then a CGI monster. While the trailers showed that to be the case months before the movie dropped, The little robots inside the Kryptonian ship did give us another cool little Easter egg. We find out that Zod comes from the city of Kandor, which is better known to comic fans as the Bottle City of Kandor, the capital city of Krypton. Kandor is shrunken and stolen by the Superman villain Brainiac and is added to his intergalactic collection of artifacts. After Superman and Brainiac square off, Kandor ends up under Superman's protection at the Fortress of Solitude. Hopefully we get a chance to see a movie version of the classic Superman villain with Kandor in tow. The Dark Knight returns. If you've watched Watchmen, you know that Zack Snyder likes recreating comic panels in his film adaptation, and Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice is loaded with callbacks to one of its biggest inspirations, the Frank Miller graphic novel The Dark Knight Returns. It starts early, with the movie's depiction of Bruce Wayne's parents being killed. A shot of Miss Wayne's pearls around the mugger's gun is a direct lift from the book, and continues throughout the movie, both in the dialogue and in the way certain shots are lined up. More than anything, however, Batman's powered armor, which he wears during the title fight with Superman, is taken straight from Miller's iconic series. Action Comics. Love him or hate him, Snyder definitely enjoys paying homage to the comics. One brief example comes during an argument between Clark Kent and Perry White at the office of the Daily Planet, during which White tells Kent that he can't report on the types of stories he wants to cover because it's not 1938 anymore. As any DC fan can tell you, that's the year Superman made his first appearance in Action Comics #1. Must there be a Superman? The movie's Action Comics reference is far from the only nod to the Man of Steel's printed adventures. During one scene, the senator played by Holly Hunter asks, "Must there be a Superman?" It's an interesting question, and one that directly points to a 1972 issue of the Superman comic in which our hero is forced to face a tribunal for his, quote, crimes against humanity. Since the hero is instrumental in the defeat of Doomsday and the foundation of the Justice League, this is a question that gets answered with a resounding yes by the end of the movie.
If you want to play a costume superhero, then you need to look the part, and that means intense workouts coupled with an insane diet. Let's take a look at how Zachary Levi went from super geek to superhero and got ripped for Shazam. When Zachary Levi agreed to take on Shazam as his next big role, he essentially agreed to make the gym his second home. After all, this is a character who has stood his ground in a number of scraps with Superman over the years. If this confrontation is ever going to play out on the big screen, then Levi has to at least keep pace with Henry Cavill. Assuming Cavill is still playing the Man of Steel by the time a crossover is viable, the movie's official synopsis even described Shazam as having a ripped, godlike body. So there's little wonder Levi began hitting the weights almost every day. During a chat with former Smallville Lex Luthor actor Michael Rosenbaum, Levi said he's working out 5 or 6 days a week. He elaborated,
Like sometimes we'll do 2-a-days and then we'll get more off days, but typically we'll just go, hour and 15-minute sessions every day.
That's a lot of time in the gym no matter who you are, and all that time pumping iron definitely shows. When someone who doesn't work out regularly starts hitting the gym hard, they usually experience what's known as newbie gains.
Yes, you too can have a body like mine, if you're not careful.
This was evidently the case for Levi, who managed to pack on an impressive amount of pounds within his first 6 weeks of training. He told Rosenbaum in February 2018.
Before I got the role, I was about 200 pounds. I hovered around 200 pounds most of my adult life.
Levi gave a similar account of his early gains when Variety caught up with him almost a year down the line. Speaking to the Hollywood Trade at the New York City premiere of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel Season 2, the actor revealed that he'd started seeing results right away. "I immediately put on about 24 pounds and then we carved that down in about half. So I've been hovering around 215 pounds, and I'm in the best shape of my life and stronger and happier and healthier than I've ever been."
What's going on?
Oh, well, I got into really good shape. Am I hitting the light right?
What's happening?
Why?
Why?
It probably won't surprise you to learn that Levi had to consume a heroic amount of calories to achieve a Shazam-worthy physique. When Variety quizzed him about his weight gain at the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel Season 2 premiere, the actor revealed that he'd been taking on between 3,000 and 4,000 calories a day ever since he won the lead role in the DC movie.
Let me just wolf down this peanut brittle real quick. Why would you do that? Oh, right, because calories.
Levi went on to give a more detailed breakdown of his Shazam calorie count during his appearance on Michael Rosenbaum's podcast.
3,700 calories with then like a bunch of other supplements like fish oil, omega-3.
It's an impressive amount of calories for sure, but how does it match up against Levi's DC counterparts? The short answer is that, well, it doesn't. Both Ben Affleck and Henry Cavill reportedly consumed up to 5,000 calories per day when training to play Batman and Superman. Levi described his diet as pretty lean and clean, and he really wasn't kidding. To achieve his body goals, the actor had to give up some of his favorite snacks and make every single mouthful count, which is why most of his meals consist of protein-rich chicken and large portions of broccoli, a favorite of bodybuilders everywhere. Levi was even eating broccoli for breakfast at one stage, documenting the experience on Instagram stories. One bemused follower took to Twitter to ask the actor why he would do such a thing, and Levi revealed that he has a variation on chicken and broccoli 5 times a day. I basically eat the same macros all day long, meat and veg of varying combinations. I used to eat a lot of eggs in the morning, but I think I have an intolerance to them. Hopefully that means he didn't have to down any raw egg shakes, Rocky style. Levi's physical transformation has clearly been a source of inspiration to his fans, with some even reaching out to ask the actor for hints and tips on getting jacked. He told one of his followers, "It's a marathon, not a sprint. I've been in the gym 5 days a week for the last 5 months, and I've eaten pretty darn healthy strictly, but not so crazy that I'm not still enjoying life. The system works." When another fan asked how her skinny husband could look more like Levi, the actor revealed that he himself used to struggle with adding muscle to his slender frame, and it was all down to diet. According to Levi, you can work out constantly, but if you aren't providing your body with all the right tools, then you're going to struggle to improve on those newbie gains. The former Chuck star replied, "The key, I found, was quite literally consuming mass quantities. You have to feed your muscles. You have to give your body the building material necessary to grow larger. You have to eat, even when you're not hungry."
14,000 calories later, I found myself down at Subway, powering through a 12-inch veggie on whole wheat.
Levi might advocate eating as much as humanly possible, but that doesn't mean eating whatever you can get your hands on. When he was asked how he manages to eat well while still enjoying his life, he gave a pretty straightforward answer: avoid processed foods. From my perspective, the biggest favor you can do for yourself is avoiding all processed foods. Sweet or savory, doesn't matter. It's all breaking down in your body as sugar that is then stored as fat. But there's a lot of tasty, clean food out there. Get into it.
Why are you eating stem first?
This is a new food for me. How else should I eat it?
The other way.
Junk food is far from the only obstacle when you're trying to balance gym life with the social life, however. Alcohol certainly doesn't help matters when you're trying to remain as trim as possible.
I'd like to purchase some of your finest beer, please.
Levi discovered the benefits of cutting out the booze when he took part in Sober October 2018. The star admitted, "It was a little difficult at first, and it's still kind of strange not having a drink when I go out at night. But overall, I feel so much healthier and happier and clearer of mind and heart. It's been a good cleanse. May even take it longer. We'll see." Finding the time to prepare 5 clean meals a day can be a big challenge for anybody, let alone a busy actor. But that's where having a major Hollywood studio as your boss comes in handy. Levi praised Warner Brothers for helping him reach his targets when he spoke to Michael Rosenbaum, revealing that the studio had arranged for his meals to be brought right to his door. He said,
"Yeah, I do meal delivery. It's part of the job, and they've been very awesome about taking care of me."
That's all well and good, but what does Levi do when he's not home? As an actor, he has to travel a lot, but even then, he sticks to his regimented diet plan. He tweeted, "I use different meal delivery companies in different cities because I need to eat a lot throughout the day, and I don't know how to cook, like at all." Imagine putting yourself through months of training and hundreds of portions of broccoli, only for one of the biggest names in fitness to call you a fraud. That's the situation Levi found himself in during March 2018, when Men's Health suggested that the actor was wearing a padded suit on set. Some behind-the-scenes photos of Levi in full costume were leaked online, and regular contributor Vinny Mancuso took one look at the size of Levi's biceps and called foul play. In response to the Men's Health investigation, Levi posted a picture of his bicep on Twitter along with the caption, "So much padding." It was the actor's way of getting back at the fitness mag, but the author of the original article wasn't convinced. In fact, Vinny Mancuso said the photo Levi posted was actually evidence that he was correct about the suit padding all along. In a follow-up article, he said, "Yes, that is a large arm. That is a gym-earned, above-average-sized appendage. But try to tell yourself honestly that the arm in that photo is the same arm in the leaked photo. You can't. You just can't do it." Levi has had a hard time shaking the fake muscle rumor since his spat with Men's Health. Some people seem to think he looked padded out in a trailer that dropped in January 2019, with one fan questioning just how he looked so huge. The actor gave a purposefully non-committal answer, but that's likely because he's sick of addressing the story by now. When Variety asked him about it on the red carpet just a few weeks earlier, Levi again denied that he needed extra mass.
Especially in this area. Does that look like fake? Does that look fake to you? Come on.
According to a study by the Society of Behavioral Medicine, having a workout partner can greatly improve your performance in the gym, doubling cardio results in some instances. While many superhero actors are set up with world-renowned trainers, the guy spotting Levi is actually a photographer by trade. Eric Blackman has posted multiple pics and videos of Levi pumping iron, unofficially documenting the actor's progress. In October 2017, Blackman tweeted, "Apparently, I'll be getting ripped for Shazam as well, since Zachary Levi is kicking my ass in the gym. I need protein now." Despite the bleak winter weather, the pair remained dedicated to the Shazam cause as 2018 rolled around. By February, Levi was already looking far more heroic in their sessions, and by May, both men were looking fighting fit. Levi replied to the second Men's Health article with another photo of his guns, and this one was harder to argue against. The actor posted a topless pic of himself in the gym, along with a hilarious equation. It's like the old saying goes, hard work, overtime, plus chicken and broccoli, minus carbs, divided by whey protein, in which X represents the amount of supplements, and Y represents the sentiment of why the hell am I doing this to myself, multiplied by shameless selfies whilst staring into nowhere. Talk about taking your workouts to the next level.
Why is this so hard to understand? This is not string theory!
When he spoke to Variety in December 2018, Levi was eager to discuss how being selected to play the lead role in Shazam changed his life in more ways than one. His name is now known across the board in Hollywood, and he likely picked up a pretty paycheck for his work on the Shazam movie. But he was also extremely grateful for the chance to get healthy. Honestly, that's the stuff that I'm most ecstatic about. Just the level of health that I've gotten to. Mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, physical health. I am so jazzed about that, and I want to keep talking about that, particularly mental health. It would have been easy for Levi to give up after Men's Health suggested that he just wasn't big enough to play a superhero, but he wasn't working out for anyone but himself. He added, "I just feel like we're in a place, particularly nowadays, where people need to be encouraged and informed on what self-love is, and to go and genuinely embrace themselves and love themselves. So I'm really happy about all of that."
Sorry. I just had to reboot.
Justice League didn't hold back on any of the big moments. We had a planet-threatening disaster, a team of superheroes determined to stop it, and a good old-fashioned race between Superman and Flash. Now that justice has been served on the big screen, we're doing justice to the little moments and small details you may have missed in Justice League. Spoilers ahead. Crisis cameo. Early in the film, you may have caught that newspaper headline for the Metropolis Post asking if a bunch of fallen heroes returned to their own planets. What you may not have noticed was the smaller headline beside the main story, Citywide Crisis. In the DC universe, a crisis is kind of a big deal, and DC doesn't throw the C word around casually. It started in Justice League of America number 21 with the Crisis on Earth 1 storyline. In the very next issue, there was Crisis on Earth 2. Later, 1985's game-changing Crisis on Infinite Earth story arc put the entire multiverse in peril. Various crises even popped up after that, like Infinite Crisis, Identity Crisis, and Final Crisis. Basically, most of DC Comics history has been defined by crises, so name-dropping the word in a DCEU movie is definitely a piece of fan service. Smooth finish. For the majority of the movie, Cyborg had a notably different look than he does in the comics. Most versions of Cyborg in the comics have a smooth, aerodynamic exterior. In Justice League, however, Cyborg had sharp edges sticking out everywhere, like a sentient pile of cutlery. But at the end of Justice League, Vic uses his growing control over the Mother Box tech to give himself a makeover, ditching the RoboCop 2 vibe for a polished shell lifted straight from the comics. And while we're on the topic of Cyborg, booyah! Throughout Cyborg's run on Teen Titans and Teen Titans Go, Sparky has had one distinguishing catchphrase.
Just practicing my booyahs. Boo 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 ya booyah!
It takes most of Justice League to get there, but right at the end, he drops his big line, giving at least some of the audience a reason to get out of their seats with a smile. Booyah! If you've never come across Cyborg in any form before Justice League, you'd never know what all the fuss was about.
Booyah!
Mira. Amber Heard's character Mira didn't get a ton of screen time in Justice League, but the costume designers definitely paid homage to Mira's comics wardrobe. From her crown to her green-scaled armor, the likeness is exact. Unfortunately, Justice League left the fate of Mira and the nature of her relationship with Aquaman up in the air. But since Amber Heard is slated to star in the upcoming Aquaman film, it looks like we'll get to see what finally happens with the future Queen of Atlantis. Red Sky of Doom. Leading up to the climax of Justice League, Steppenwolf takes the mother boxes back to that little Russian town to start his apocalypse terraforming picnic. The sky turns blood red. On the surface, that red sky is pure apocalypse. Steppenwolf's turning Earth into a version of his reddish world, after all. But under the surface, that red sky represents very DC-specific levels of doom. Leading up to and during the Crisis on Infinite Earth storyline, DC comic artists started coloring the skies red in their other comic books. Most of the time, that was the only tie-in, which is the reason panels like this showed up in comics like Swamp Thing. So while those red skies made sense in the movie, they also represented DC's classic way of saying, big things are going down. Gorilla Sign Language. If you could give the Flash an iconic nemesis that wasn't another speedster, it would undoubtedly be Gorilla Grodd, a hyper-intelligent ape who's got a hyper-personal vendetta against the Flash. Obviously, there weren't any giant gorillas in Justice League, but there was a mention of that classic villain, albeit briefly. When Bruce Wayne tracks down Alan, the super speedster tries to convince Wayne that he's not really the Flash, which leads to this line.
Fluent in sign language? Gorilla sign language?
For fans of the comics, it was immediately obvious that Alan was referring to Grodd, the greatest gorilla in the DC universe, at least outside of Jackanapes, the Joker's adopted gorilla's son. But this was much more likely a sly reference to Grodd. Cold Resistance. In that same scene where Bruce Wayne first meets Barry Allen, there are a ton of things going on in the background. If you weren't paying attention to the Rick and Morty episode, you might have noticed something else on one of those screens. Look closely at the monitor directly behind and to the left of Ezra Miller, and pay attention to the words at the top. Cold Resistance. Clearly, Barry has been testing his suit's tolerance for a chill, and one particular Flash villain comes to mind when you think of cold. Captain Cold, aka Leonard Snart, one of Flash's deadliest villains. Does this mean that Flash has already defeated Captain Cold in this universe? Or was he gearing up for a confrontation when Steppenwolf, stepped on everyone's plans? We just don't know. Ace Chemicals. There were a good handful of Easter eggs emblazoned on the buildings throughout the film, one of which was a small neon sign advertising Ace Chemicals. And if you know your comics history, you know where this is going. Yup, Ace Chemicals is the chemical plant where the Joker fell into a toxic vat and became, well, the Joker. It's gone by different names in different versions of the origin story. It was called Access Chemicals in 1989's Batman, an oddly Monarch playing card company in the original run of Detective Comics. But Ace Chemicals is now DC canon for the name of the birthplace of the Joker. In Justice League, the sign is a blink and you'll miss a detail, but it's a nice touch on the world building of the movie. Gotham Gargoyle. Nothing says Batman like standing on a gargoyle high above Gotham on a dark, stormy night. If you could put that image in a bottle, it'd smell like the inside of Batman's cowl. Guaranteed. So the shot of Batman on a Grim Reaper gargoyle in the Justice League Comic-Con trailer was a definite crowd pleaser. If you've done your homework and read all gazillion issues of Detective Comics, you might recognize that Reaper image. The shot is a direct homage to the cover of Detective Comics number 682. Ancient King. After Steppenwolf's first invasion of Earth, the three mother boxes were split among the races. The Atlanteans and Amazons built cool little shrines for their boxes. But the men, being men, decided they couldn't trust anyone, so they buried theirs out in the woods. IMDb only lists the main guy there as the Ancient King of Men. There's one particular Ancient King of Men who definitely plays a role in the DC universe, King Arthur. Most of the mythological lore of King Arthur is kept intact in the DCEU. So it's definitely possible that he was the one who would be entrusted with the mother box after a war that happened hundreds of years ago. Super Plaid. Superman is the worst at disguises, but that's part of who he is, so we're all okay with that by now. Then, somewhere along the line, live-action adaptations of Superman decided that he also needed to add plaid to his repertoire of implausibly common wardrobe choices. Maybe it's because he grew up on a farm in Kansas, and that's what farmers wear. Whatever the reason, old Clark's been putting on plaid whenever he visits the family farm ever since 1978's Superman. It's usually red, but not always. It was white in Superman 4 and white again in Superman Returns. Man of Steel got nervous and put his mom in plaid, but oh, there's Clark wearing plaid again in Batman vs. Superman. All the way in Metropolis, too.
Some of his shirts have some of the plaid in them, so there's a little reminder of the Midwestern boy from Kansas.
And who can forget the CW Smallville, a show that spent more on plaid than Sister Act's entire budget for nun costumes. Which brings us back to Justice League, where Clark heads out to the farm in Smallville to talk to Lois, in plaid. Even though she totally knows who he is, and he can just wear the suit with the big S. She just called him Clark in front of a dozen policemen while he was Supermaning the Super Friends. So why did he change to plaid? Because it's an Easter egg. Look, the bottom line is, if you ever see a guy anywhere wearing plaid, there's a 30% chance it's Superman.
Task Force X did its job and the world is safe. For now. Suicide Squad may be a critical punching bag, but it still has its rewards for comic book diehards, including a bunch of references and homages for the faithful to enjoy. So let's pick up Harley Quinn's mallet and start smashing some Suicide Squad Easter eggs. Watching The Watchmen. Remember when Deadshot looks into the clothing store window and starts moping out about his daughter? That huge yellow smiley face behind the mannequins wasn't there by chance. In DC Comics' 2016 Rebirth event, the world of the Watchmen officially entered the DC universe, and it may only be a matter of time before that happens in the movies as well, with this and similar Easter eggs like the Watchmen graffiti in Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice helping to set up the inevitable. Frosty Flunky. While the Joker mostly employs nameless goons, one of his men sports a name tag reading Mr. Frost. Brian Azzarello's graphic novel Joker was told from the perspective of Johnny Frost, who goes from being Joker's chauffeur to becoming his top man. The scenes of Harley shaking her stuff in a nightclub and Mr. Frost being the Joker's #1 guy are likely both inspired by Azzarello's story. High Rise Tribute. This blink and you'll miss it Easter egg is pretty easy to figure out if you know your DC history. The giant building the team infiltrates to rescue Amanda Waller is named after comics writer John Ostrander. While Ostrander didn't create the original team that debuted in 1959, he did come up with the modern Suicide Squad in 1987. What goes around, comes around. When Captain Boomerang convinces Slipknot his neck bomb is a dud, the scene mirrors what happens in the comics after Boomerang tells Slipknot that their wrist-mounted bombs were fake. Of course, in the comics, the bomb only blew off his arm instead of his head. You win some, you lose some. Dancing with the Devil in the Pale Moonlight. Some people might prefer Harley Quinn's classic black and red costume, but at least her original outfit appears in the movie. When the squad prepares to go to Midway City, Harley pulls out a familiar-looking outfit, but tosses it aside in favor of something a bit more revealing.
For bad guys, it's what we do.
We also got to see Margot Robbie don the classic Harley getup in a flashback sequence, which recreates artist Alex Ross's iconic cover to 1999's Batman Harley Quinn. Time away from Mr. J. After being let down by the Joker a few times throughout the movie, Harley appears to have some second thoughts about her maniacal boyfriend.
Huh?
Her budding friendship and flirtatious chemistry with Will Smith's Deadshot is a callback to what happens in the comics and the animated feature Batman Assault on Arkham, where things occasionally got hot, heavy, and downright weird between these two Batman villains.
I got an itch. Thought you could help me scratch, cowboy.
Flashback. This Easter egg is kind of obvious, but it's still pretty awesome. Captain Boomerang's introductory flashback sequence shows a jewelry store robbery in which his getaway is stopped by Ezra Miller's Flash. It's only right that Captain Boomerang is thwarted by the Scarlet Speedster, since he first appeared as a Flash villain way back in 1960. In an interview with Collider, director David Ayer revealed that this scene was shot while Suicide Squad was in post-production. This scene was directed by Batman vs. Superman director Zack Snyder while he was filming Justice League.
Critics and audiences agree that Aquaman feels like a breath of fresh air after drowning in DC's murkier efforts. It's a light, funny adventure film anchored by two charming leads and buoyed by eye-popping visuals. But a vessel this large can only turn its rudder so fast, and it's bound to have a few barnacles still clinging to its hull. Prepare for spoilers and continue full speed ahead to the 3 best and 3 worst things about Aquaman. Batman and Superman have some pretty iconic bad guys always giving them grief. By contrast, Aquaman doesn't. The movie introduces perhaps the 2 most significant villains from the pages of Aquaman comics, Black Manta and Ocean Master. Both of them are okay, but the story suffers slightly from having 2 separate antagonists diluting the story's central conflict. It's a problem all too common to superhero movies. At least we know we'll get more of Black Manta and that big laser-shooting helmet of his in the inevitable sequel. Jason Momoa was a highlight of Justice League, and fans have been looking forward to more of his likable dirtbag embodiment of Arthur Curry. Not only does the Aquaman solo movie live up to its potential as a Momoa vehicle, it supports him with one of the best casts yet assembled for the DCEU. It's an eclectic ensemble with some surprising cameos, but each gets a moment to shine, and unlike some of the more convoluted comic movies in recent memory, everyone's clearly on the same page about what kind of strange adventure they're on. Momoa continues his shtick as the buff, waterlogged barfly with a heart of gold, but being the center of attention allows him to add new layers to the character. He lets Arthur's self-doubt bubble to the surface in his most vulnerable moments, making him endearing without sacrificing any of his rowdy charm. Meanwhile, Amber Heard successfully leads alongside him as Mira, with a perfect balance of fearsome focus and wide-eyed wonder. From her scene wandering Sicily with Arthur to her battle through the city, Heard makes Mira a true standout. Justice League formally introduced audiences to Aquaman, but only had time for a brief exploration of his Atlantean origins. Mira appeared in one sequence, in which Arthur attempted to protect a mother box from Steppenwolf. Arthur expressed bitterness over being abandoned by his mother, Queen Atlanta, and held her neglect against the people of Atlantis. The Arthur we catch up with in Aquaman is less angry at his mother. He's aware that she was forced to return to the sea, and learns that she was sacrificed to a monster-filled place called the Trench for the crime of having a half-breed son, filling him with grief and guilt. The movie more or less has to undo the motivations established in Justice League in order to get his character arc moving in the right direction. There's also a change in how Atlanteans communicate. It seemed in Justice League that Arthur and Mira could only talk inside an air bubble, but Aquaman has its characters speak freely even when submerged. It makes sense that a movie set mostly underwater would choose not to complicate its characters' ability to talk to each other in this way, but it raises the question of why Justice League introduced such a clunky conceit in the first place. Fans might be slightly annoyed at Aquaman's contradictions of established DCEU lore, but this actually becomes one of its strongest assets. The movie is completely unburdened by connections to other movies, either past or present. Where Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice nearly drowned in setups and introductions designed to pay off in future installments, Aquaman floats free, unencumbered by the sort of franchise-minded filmmaking that has sunk other comic book movies. Aside from briefly mentioning Arthur's battle with Steppenwolf, Aquaman contains no reference to any other DC characters not involved in its hero's journey. No secret LexCorp files, no foreshadowing of cataclysmic events to come. It's just a straight-ahead adventure story about Aquaman and his friends and enemies. It is, in fact, a perfect jumping-on point for newcomers to the DC universe, something Warner Bros. Sorely needs after the convoluted webs of its predecessors proved off-putting for audiences and critics. Regardless of how well Aquaman plays to its strengths, it's still going to be the story of a would-be king who talks to fish and does battle with merpeople. It will probably never reach the universal acclaim of something like The Dark Knight, a movie based on comic books and treated as a hard-hitting police drama. Arthur Curry's adventures will simply never have the same potential for crossover appeal. But here's the thing about a movie that leans all the way into its own comic book silliness. It's exactly what DC Films needs right now. While some discerning theatergoers might be turned off by such a goofy outing as Aquaman, it serves as the perfect antidote to the grim self-seriousness of movies like Batman vs. Superman.
Tell me. Do you bleed?
We've watched Superman die, and we've seen Batman live long enough to become the villain. Even Wonder Woman's solo story didn't have much time for levity once Diana arrived in the trenches of World War I. Justice League had a jarring tonal dissonance, trapped somewhere between brooding and romping.
See your genius move. It's dying. You really are out of your mind.
I'm not the one who brought a pitchfork.
But Aquaman is bright, wacky, and seems intent on doing nothing beyond shooting fun straight into viewers' eyeballs. Arthur's tale is a feel-good story concerned not with societal ethics or the meaning of existence, but with his own journey to find his own place and commit to what he cares about. It will never make a short list of important films or warrant major Oscar consideration, but it isn't trying to. It's just fun. And in a year when Marvel slaughtered half of all life in the universe, that makes it a welcome dash of lightness and joy.
Show off. I could have just peed on it.
Wonder Woman 1984 is a treat for all ages, but there are many aspects of it that only adult viewers grasp. From the film's most obscure references to its uncomfortable moments, these are all the things only adults notice in Wonder Woman 1984. As the title implies, Wonder Woman 1984 picks up with Diana in the midst of one of Hollywood's favorite decades to portray, the 1980s. There's a lot to love about the 80s, from the decade's awesome music to its gleaming video stores. And anyone who lived through the 1980s will recognize many real details from that time scattered throughout the set of Wonder Woman 1984. Sparked by the public's obsession with fitness, people everywhere were donning spandex and leg warmers. In its earliest shots of people on the street of DC, Wonder Woman 1984 offers a number of examples of this look. Speaking of fashion, no 80s setting would be complete with ridiculously over-the-top parachute pants and a whole lot of metallic fabric. Steve Trevor shows off a few of these looks when he and Diana attempt to find him an era-appropriate look. Even the crosswalk signs in Wonder Woman 1984 are accurate to the time period. Before today's modern LEDs were installed in the early 2000s, the signage did indeed display the words "walk, don't walk," rather than the current symbols representing a person in mid-stride. Wonder Woman 1984 gets a whole lot right about the 1980s, but there is still one important plot detail that it manages to get majorly wrong. This error can be spotted at the beginning of Max Lord's big finale speech. After successfully taking over the world's broadcasting signals using secret government tech, Lord is able to splash his face across the screens of unwitting bystanders everywhere. No matter where Diana turns, his face is visible, urging the people of the world to wish for what they want and see their wildest dreams come true. The only problem with this supervillainous scheme is that those screens broadcasting Lord's face include television and computer displays. This scene takes place decades before the internet or streaming services became publicly available. In fact, the concept of a home computer was considered incredibly novel and exotic at the time, as Apple had just started selling their first generation of Macintosh computers that January. This sort of all-encompassing broadcast wasn't just impossible at the time, it was basically unthinkable.
This is a highly sophisticated office computer.
That this blooper wasn't caught by the production team prior to release just goes to show how easy it is to take technology for granted. Adults can't help but roll their eyes when one of Max Lord's last business investors, Simon Stagg, threatens to report him to the Federal Trade Commission if Max doesn't return his investment money within 48 hours. This sort of race-against-the-clock trope is favored by film and television producers because it provides a sense of urgency to the plot without being too restrictive. The 48-hour timeline is a particularly popular choice.
You have 48 hours starting on my mark.
You have 48 hours to get my money?
In 48 hours.
You have 20 seconds.
You have 48 hours.
The 1982 action comedy movie 48 Hours, starring Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy, literally calls itself out for using this cliché in its very title. We can't blame the filmmakers for using this reliable plot point, but it does get repetitive. Younger viewers may find Max Lord's conflict engaging, but more mature audiences might find it to be more than a little bit predictable. The technology Max Lord uses to take over the planet's airwaves in Wonder Woman 1984 may be the stuff of science fiction, but the parent program mentioned in the movie as its comparison was actually entirely real. The 1980s marked the height of the Cold War, when the United States and the Soviet Union were attempting to one-up each other while maintaining a public pretense of peace. Secret government programs proliferated during this era, one of which was known as the Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI, a missile defense system proposed by Ronald Reagan in 1983 as an attempt to render nuclear weapons obsolete. Nicknamed the Star Wars program, the SDI proposed to utilize state-of-the-art technology and weapons like lasers, satellites, and ground and space-based missile systems to neutralize incoming threats, like nuclear missiles. It was officially scrapped in 1993. Kristen Wiig does an excellent job portraying the painfully shy and awkward character of Barbara Minerva, who transforms from an introverted wallflower into the empowered apex predator known as Cheetah. However, Barbara's character arc might seem remarkably familiar to older audience members who have seen more movies. That's because Barbara's story revolves on the axis of a heavily played-out trope, the one where the disregarded nerdy girl gets a makeover and suddenly transforms into a popular hottie. Just look at My Fair Lady, Grease, The Princess Diaries, and She's All That. Indeed, this plot point has been seen countless times before, and its use tends to marginalize the character in question far more than it empowers them. To put it plainly, no one is surprised to see the ugly duckling become the swan any longer, especially because the duckling is pretty much always already attractive.
Okay, now take your glasses off, let that hair down, and act like you don't know how pretty you are.
In Wonder Woman 1984, Diana unwittingly uses a coveted dreamstone to bring her lost love Steve Trevor back from the dead. But he doesn't return in the way you'd expect. Rather than magically resurrecting his body, the dreamstone inserts Steve Trevor's consciousness into the body of another man living near Diana in Washington, D.C. To minimize audience confusion, the handsome man as he's credited is shown briefly at the start of his possession. Then his likeness switches to Steve Trevor's. It's possible this was intended as some sort of metaphor about only having eyes for your true love. This is something younger audiences might be able to buy into a little more easily. But this magical body snatching comes off as more problematic than romantic for adults. Steve Trevor doesn't know who Handsome Man is and disrupts his entire life with his presence. What happens to his job, his social life, and all other aspects of his existence when he suddenly becomes Steve? Wouldn't the poor man be terrified when suddenly coming to after Steve Rogers forfeits his parasitic existence? Also, one can't help but wonder what the implications are of being intimate with someone's body when they have no presence of mind to provide consent. At the very least, it's unnerving. Wonder Woman 1984 is a superhero movie, so there are always going to be some weird physics involved. These people are superheroes after all. Can Diana lasso lightning? Sure, why not? But the film is also loaded with unrealistic depictions of physics and technology that are hard to ignore, especially for a jaded adult. For example, when Steve insists on flying a modern plane, he does so without issue, despite the massive differences between planes he flew during World War I and the modern jet he and Diana commandeer.
The way I fly, they will never find us.
And when Diana manages to make the jet magically invisible, it also simultaneously disappears from radar. But just because an object becomes invisible to the naked eye doesn't mean it also becomes invisible to radar, because the mass of the plane is still there to reflect the radar waves. Then again, she made the plane invisible, so we can't nitpick this one too much. Maybe it's all part of her invisibility magic. But there's also the fact that at high altitudes, it gets pretty hard to breathe without oxygen. That's a little harder to explain away for Human Man Steve.
Put your mask back on! That's an order, Marine! I can't breathe!
But Diana and Steve chat away unassisted, as though they're toddling down the highway, rather than speeding through the air thousands of feet at hundreds of miles an hour. Likewise, the final battle between Wonder Woman and Cheetah defies the rules of electricity to the point of silliness. The two women are impervious to thousands of volts of electricity in ways that can only be explained with comic book logic. And again, this is a comic book movie, so that's fair game. Then suddenly, those excuses stop mattering at all when the live wire Cheetah swings from without any apparent trouble contacts the water she's immersed in and becomes a source of her defeat. Professional wrestling is beloved by people of all ages, but younger fans likely miss the real-life reference planted in the midst of Wonder Woman 1984. While visiting the home of a man with important information regarding the Dreamstone, Diana examines a magazine lying near his front door. It's the August 1984 issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, featuring Jerry the King Lawler on the front cover. As it turns out, this particular issue really does exist, and it really was in print at the time. This was excitedly pointed out by Lawler himself on Twitter, after Stuart Schreck of DC Comics brought it to his attention. It might seem random to feature a pro wrestling themed magazine in Wonder Woman 1984, but at the time, sports entertainment had reached a pinnacle of unparalleled popularity. The 1980s were a huge decade for professional wrestling in particular, to the point that it is often referred to as the sport's golden age. Offering a nod to this aspect of the decade is something many grown-up viewers of Wonder Woman 1984 no doubt appreciate. In the DCEU, Asteria is a celebrated champion of the Amazons, who selflessly sacrificed herself in battle so the rest of her sisters could flee to the safety of what would become Themyscira. This fallen hero is remembered as the Golden Warrior for her courageous heart and legendary armor. To honor Asteria, a golden statue of her likeness was erected in Themyscira's Colosseum. The Amazonian athletic competition shown in the beginning of the film is also held as a way to remember and reflect upon Asteria's legacy. In real life, Asteria was a name given to several prominent figures in Greek mythology, meaning starry one. Interestingly, this particular strand of mythology portrays Asteria as eventually transforming into an island to escape Zeus's advances. Adult viewers will pick up on how reminiscent this is of her origin story regarding the island of Themyscira, and how it echoes the Amazons' desires to separate themselves from the world of men. Culture and technology may have changed, but tales of heroes and villains remain timeless. Considering she fell in battle and was never heard from again, the Amazons naturally assumed that Asteria died defending them. This assumption was reinforced when Diana went on a mission to find the fallen warrior and was only able to track down Asteria's golden eagle armor, which she winds up using in her final face-off against Cheetah and Max Lord. However, Wonder Woman 1984's mid-credits scene reveals that Asteria is very much alive, secretly living among normal humans and saving the occasional baby when the opportunity presents itself. Although younger viewers may not recognize the stunning brunette playing Asteria in this scene, adults undoubtedly will. Carter made a name for herself playing Diana Prince on the classic Wonder Woman television series, which originally aired on ABC and CBS from 1975 to 1979. Despite the fact that she's been portraying Amazon warriors for quite some time, Carter still manages to dazzle new viewers in 2020 and beyond, just as she did all the way back in the 70s. It will be interesting to see what DC has planned for the iconic actress. Hopefully, there's more to come for her new character beyond this brief, if thrilling, appearance.
Zack Snyder's Justice League is an ambitious, 4-hour epic packed with tons of previously unseen footage, as well as contradictions and unexplained moments. Here are those confusing moments explained. Of all the minor continuity discrepancies between the DCEU movies, one of the most noticeable is the case of Aquaman's eye color. If you've missed out on the Whedon cut of Justice League back in 2017, then you may be used to the brown yellows closer to Jason Momoa's natural eye color in James Wan's Aquaman. In the 2017 Justice League, Aquaman can be seen with striking baby blues. This coloring was brought back again in the Snyder cut, leaving some viewers reasonably confused. As it turns out, this is a choice both directors are very aware of and cite as an artistic difference. But according to Momoa, it was a decision motivated by something the actor himself said. In an interview with the Huffington Post promoting Aquaman back in 2018, Momoa revealed about the change. It was my idea I brought to Zach. I thought it would be rad to have a different eye color, something that's completely Atlantean, that was like his mark. I felt like it was just something that would be a little otherworldly, so Zach really liked it. As for why director James Wan went in a different direction, Momoa said, I feel like Wan wanted to have a warmer thing in this movie. I feel like my justification for the change is that he kind of went home. He's more rooted and he's calm when he's around his family. Another inconsistency between Aquaman, Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice, and Zack Snyder's Justice League has no real bearing on their overall plots, but is a detail that can be irksome to anyone following the DCEU releases thus far. It's time to talk about the Trident. In Zack Snyder's Justice League, Queen Atlanna's Trident is presented to Aquaman by Vulko. Vulko encourages Aquaman to take the trident and claim his birthright to the throne of Atlantis. He declines, setting up the 2018 Aquaman arc. In the theatrical version of the film, this was replaced by a scene between Mera and Aquaman after Steppenwolf steals the mother box hidden in Atlantis. It's implied that Mera gives Aquaman the trident that he uses to fight in the rest of the film. In both cuts of the film, he uses the trident during battle with the parademons, but the moment where Aquaman seems to ask for the trident doesn't exist in the Snyder cut.
Then I'm gonna need something from you.
However, that still doesn't explain the footage first shown in Snyder's previous movie, Batman vs. Superman, which shows Aquaman with a trident that looks pretty much exactly like the weapon he wields in Justice League. Does Aquaman just have an extra trident that looks just like his mother's? This is another perplexing moment that is a result of creative changes made following the lackluster theatrical release of Justice League. The way Snyder envisioned underwater communications between Atlanteans works just fine for his movie, but James Wan made some changes to fit his vision for Aquaman. In both versions of Justice League, all underwater conversations between Atlanteans happen in air bubbles they create. In James Wan's Aquaman, the Atlanteans no longer require these bubbles to speak to each other underwater. Why did this happen?
Whenever you notice something like that, a wizard did it.
Well, not really. Wan said in an Entertainment Weekly interview, people are overthinking it. They're just gonna talk. Honestly, it's hard to imagine him having any other stance. Snyder's stylish portrayal of Atlantean communication would have quickly become annoying in a movie that takes place primarily in Atlantis. To many who grew up with the Justice League comics and cartoons, Green Lantern is a core member of the League. Sadly, the colossal bomb that was 2011's Green Lantern movie with Ryan Reynolds ensured that DC won't be touching Hal Jordan for a good while. But it seems like Snyder has put the wheels in motion to one day bring Green Lantern back into the fold. The climax of the second part of Zack Snyder's Justice League is a flashback of epic proportions. It depicts the first age of heroes and the final battle between Darkseid and the humans, Atlanteans, and Amazons. The one Lantern visible, Yal Ghur, was in the original cut, but in the Snyder cut he explicitly dies by Darkseid's hand. The scene also highlights how the ring escaped and continued the hero's line, which presumably would have been followed up on in a future Justice League sequel. Yal Ghur wasn't the only Lantern that made an appearance in the Snyder cut. Kilowog, set up to be one of the main characters in HBO Max's Green Lantern core series, appears dead in Cyborg's vision of the desolate future timeline, aka the Nightmare. One of the most surprising and unusual changes made to the Snyder Cut comes from a character who isn't in the movie for a terribly long amount of screen time. Still, it's enough to notice how Snyder has made Mira change her accent. Or at least it seems that way. The truth is probably much simpler. In Aquaman and 2017's Justice League, Heard voiced the Atlantean Queen with an accent that sounded more or less like her regular speaking voice.
My parents fought in the wars. She took me in.
What a saint.
You dare speak of Queen Atlanna that way?
Zack Snyder's Justice League has Heard putting on a British accent.
My parents died in the wars. She took me in.
What a saint.
You dare speak of Queen Atlanna that way?
It's likely that the original scenes with Mira for the movie were already completely finished and were simply added back for the Snyder Cut. This means that the Mira scenes in 2017's Justice League are almost certainly reshoots. This choice is minor, and in keeping with Snyder's objective to completely preserve his original vision for the film. If you are at all confused about the scene with Lois Lane and a green space alien impersonating Martha Kent, don't worry, so are we. Later revealing himself to Bruce Wayne and to the DC Universe at large, Martian Manhunter, aka John Jones, makes his live-action debut in Zack Snyder's Justice League in a mysterious scene. At the end of a long conversation between Lois and Martha about Clark, Martha exits and, unbeknownst to Lois, shapeshifts first into Martian Manhunter and then into Secretary of Defense Calvin Swanwick. In the scene, Martha advises Lois that she still needs to be part of society, which motivates her to get out, placing her in the right place at the right time when Superman is brought back to life. This moment is pivotal, and the knowledge that Martian Manhunter was orchestrating events in the movie the whole time is mind-blowing. Martian Manhunter was one of the original Justice League members, and his appearance in the Snyderverse brings the League's new total up to that oh-so-important number 7. Now that we know what Snyder planned for 2 Justice League sequels, we know he was going to expand the group and bring in Green Lantern and other DC legends. But now, the future of Martian Manhunter in the DCEU remains uncertain. A very important part of the Snyderverse is the Nightmare. It's never really explained in either Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice or Zack Snyder's Justice League, nor is it referred to by name. Still, understanding it is vital to understanding the greater meaning behind many of the new additions to the Snyder Cut. The Nightmare is introduced in Batman vs. Superman when Bruce dreams of being in a sandy, washed-out desert. After being ambushed by a group of men, Batman sees parademons coming in the distance and is overtaken. This vision concludes with the reveal of an evil Superman, and Bruce being awoken to a flash from the future telling him, Lois is the key. It's a reference to what happens in Justice League, but also is a clue to her importance in the now shuttered sequels Snyder was planning. The Nightmare itself makes a return in the Snyder Cut, where it becomes clear that Darkseid is the cause of the apocalyptic future. It's never explicitly stated, but Snyder has explained that this is a vision of the future that must be stopped. In the Snyder Cut, we see Superman holding the burned body of Lois in the Batcave, which is the turning point that Bruce must never let happen. There's a lot to love about Zack Snyder's Justice League, but admittedly, it doesn't explain some of its biggest concepts, such as what exactly is the anti-life equation and why does Darkseid want it so badly? Originally created for DC's Fourth World arc in 1970, the anti-life equation is a secret way of controlling all sentient beings. Darkseid believes part of the equation exists in the subconscious of humanity, which is why Steppenwolf interrogates people using those creepy spider bugs. Thematically, a common interpretation is that the equation is a mathematical proof of the futility of living and a way to dominate humanity through spreading hopelessness. What it actually is, and whether or not it has a physical form in the Snyderverse, is one of the biggest mysteries for the future of the DCEU. It's not explained at all in the movie, but Superman's pitch black suit has great historical significance that references one of Snyder's key inspirations for his Justice League. The black suit in Zack Snyder's Justice League is a reference to 1993's The Reign of Superman comic arc, the follow-up to previous year's The Death of Superman, which saw Superman die while fighting Doomsday. When he comes back to life in Reign, he's wearing the black suit in an iconic moment of DC Comics history. Since then, it has always been associated with the death and return of Superman. In the lore, the suit was designed to help the weakened Superman absorb more solar energy so he can be stronger after coming back to life. While this may be obvious to older DC Comics fans, it's not left unexplained for no reason. There was actually a deleted scene that was shot during Snyder's original production that showed a newly resurrected Superman choosing to don either a suit of Kryptonian armor or the iconic black suit. Joe Manganiello joined the DC Universe as Deathstroke in a mid-credit scene in the theatrical cut of Justice League back in 2017. The yacht scene that served as his introduction is in the Snyder cut, but in an altered form. However, the restored version of the scene is more confusing than anything else. In the theatrical Justice League, Deathstroke's introduction was a teaser for a Legion of Doom movie where Luthor gathers a band of villains to face off against the Justice League.
Shouldn't we have a league of our own?
In the version of the scene that made it into the Snyder Cut, Luthor tells Deathstroke Batman's true identity, which is a significant difference. At the time, Snyder's intention was to make a standalone Ben Affleck Batman film following Justice League, with Manganiello's Deathstroke serving as the main villain. Affleck dropped out, and The Batman eventually turned into the Robert Pattinson-led, Matt Reeves-directed project currently in production. Now, both versions of Justice League have scenes teasing movies that will never see the light of day. The nightmare scene in the epilogue is the most dire of all. Parademons roam the land while Batman and the rest of the League are at the end of their rope. Aquaman is dead, replaced by Mira. Deathstroke is working with the League, and Flash is wearing his future costume from the Batman vs. Superman flashback. Jared Leto's Joker makes his return to mock the Dark Knight one last time. He and Batman make important references to the deaths of Robin, Harley Quinn, and Lois Lane before Joker offers Bruce a truce. The sequence ends with the League preparing for what might just be one last battle at the end of the world with Superman. The scene is loaded with implications about what might have happened in the future of the Snyderverse. It confirms the death of Robin at the hands of the Joker, and that Bruce letting Lois die in a tragic blast is the turning point of the conflict according to Snyder. This tragedy allows Superman to succumb to the anti-life equation and therefore fall completely under Darkseid's control. Time travel and multiverses were going to play a major role in Justice League 2 and 3, but now this single scene is the most we'll see of Zack Snyder's dark Justice League trilogy.
From the lawsuit that took him out of comics to his journey to being one of the most highly anticipated movie heroes of this decade, here's the untold truth of Shazam. After his debut in 1938, Superman was a huge success. So successful, in fact, that he had inspired a massive boom for the brand new superhero genre, including a huge wave of imitators and ripoffs. Dozens of new titles hoped to create the next Superman, but Fawcett Publications was one publisher that actually managed to do it. In 1940, writer Bill Parker and artist C.C. Beck introduced the world to Captain Marvel, a character who had all of Superman's powers, but with two key differences. First, Captain Marvel's origins were drawn from a more magical, mythological source than the sci-fi explanations behind Superman's power. Second, and far more importantly, his mild-mannered secret identity was a kid. Billy Batson, a homeless child, was chosen by the wizard Shazam. With a single magic word, he could transform into an adult who wielded the powers of 6 mythological heroes, turning him into the world's mightiest mortal. In other words, every kid who wished they were Superman could now read the adventures of a kid who could become Superman whenever he wanted. With that idea, Captain Marvel was an instant success. If you got a good memory for trivia, you might already know that Billy Batson and his magical alter ego made their debuts in the very first issue of Whiz Comics. But did you know that was actually Whiz Comics number 2? That might seem confusing, but that's only because it is. Before debuting a new title, publishers would often create ash can editions, cheap, low-quality versions with low print runs that they could use as proof of concept to attract potential advertisers and secure a copyright. They'd done the same with Parker and Beck's new character, then called Captain Thunder, but still hadn't settled on a title, publishing it as both Thrill Comics and Flash Comics. By the time they got to publication, they'd decided to go with Whiz. Since they'd already published the story in the ash can, Whiz started at number 2. Even though they technically printed it twice already. Superman might have been the original, but as the 40s went on, Captain Marvel quickly became the most popular superhero of the decade by outselling Superman in Action Comics. According to the Museum of Comic Book Advertising, Captain Marvel Adventures would eventually hit a high point of 1.3 million sales per month. That's an impressive figure under any circumstances, but consider that over the course of those same years, Captain Marvel and his sidekicks were also appearing in Whiz Comics, WoW Comics, Master Comics, Captain Marvel Jr., Mary Marvel, and the Marvel family. In fact, he was so popular that Hoppy the Marvel Bunny, a rabbit version of Captain Marvel created for Fawcett's line of funny animal comics, was headlining 2 titles every month. For comparison, Superman and Batman each had 3, and one of them was World's Finest Comics, the series they appeared in together. If you ever go back and read any Captain Marvel comics from the 40s, it's not difficult to figure out the secret of their success. They're actually good. While a lot of Golden Age creators struggled with figuring out the rules of the new medium and the superhero genre, the Captain Marvel stories presented fun, straightforward, and well-structured adventures. C.C. Beck's art had always been fantastic, but the arrival of writer Otto Binder was the final ingredient needed to make Captain Marvel great. Binder and Beck would become the team that most identified with the character, and in 1943, they created what is generally considered to be one of the most important stories of the Golden Age, the Monster Society of Evil.
Monster Society of Evil, the vilest villains of Fawcett City united. Together, we'll conquer the universe!
It was an epic story that ran through a full 25 issues of Captain Marvel Adventures, the first long-form, multi-part superhero story in comics. It was also the first story to feature a villainous super team made up of pre-existing villains who united to take down the heroes, paving the way for the modern-day event comic. As you might have already guessed, National Comics, the company that would later become DC, was not happy about Captain Marvel outselling Superman. So unhappy, in fact, that they filed a lawsuit against Fawcett that made it to court in 1948, alleging that they'd violated the copyright on Superman by ripping him off for their own character. Unfortunately for Fawcett, that actually is what happened.
I wanted to be you. Whenever I was out there facing down the bad guys, I'd think, what would Superman do? Now,
in a much later interview, Roscoe Fawcett would recall telling his staff, "Give me a Superman." Even beyond that, the similarities were impossible to ignore. Superman didn't have the market cornered on super strength and invulnerability, but the cover to Whiz Comics number 2 featured Captain Marvel tossing a car, much like Superman on the cover of Action Comics number 1. In 1954, the courts ruled against Fawcett, and they lost the rights to continue publishing Captain Marvel stories. After the infamous lawsuit, Captain Marvel's adventures ended, and while he wouldn't be seen on the comics page again for almost 2 decades, a character that was selling over 1 million copies a month doesn't just vanish from pop culture. Plenty of readers had fond memories of the character, and plenty of publishers were eager to recreate that level of success. In the United Kingdom, a publisher called L. Miller & Son drafted artist Mick Anglo to create an unofficial continuation of the series. The character was renamed Marvelman, and the magic word was changed to Kimota. Since the British printings of Captain Marvel had ended at number 24, Marvelman picked up at number 25. It ran from 1954 to 1963, but in 1982, the strip was revived in the pages of Warrior. It was rebooted in a much darker direction by Alan Moore and Gary Leach, and served to pave the way for later Moore projects like Watchmen. In 1972, DC publisher Carmine Infantino decided that Captain Marvel had been absent long enough. With that, DC licensed the characters from Fawcett and began publishing all new adventures of the original Captain Marvel in the pages of Shazam. The first issue was drawn by C.C. Beck and featured Otto Binder, who had left DC in 1969 to focus on sci-fi novels, as a character in the first issue. The series would run for 35 issues, bringing the Marvel family to a new generation of readers and incorporating them into the DC multiverse. Readers weren't just reintroduced to the good guys, though. In Shazam number 28, Black Adam returned, an evil version of Captain Marvel who had made his only appearance 32 years earlier. While he lost that first fight, he'd go on to become one of DC's most prominent villains, and an occasional hero. When DC revived Captain Marvel in 1972, it was in a series called Shazam, and by 1974, they'd been prohibited from referring to their lead character as Captain Marvel on the cover at all. The reason? An upstart superhero publisher called Marvel Comics had snatched up the copyright on that name for a new character they'd introduced in 1967. Their Captain Marvel was a spacefaring soldier of the Kree race named Mar-Vell, who had come to Earth on a mission of conquest and decided to become a cosmic hero instead. In an interesting twist, Mar-Vell was revamped in 1969 with a new red costume with a big yellow insignia on the chest and a young sidekick, Rick Jones, with whom he switched bodies in a flash of light whenever a hero was needed. Of course, there would be other versions of Captain Marvel that Marvel Comics would make, including one that might be a bit more familiar to movie-going audiences. Needless to say, the fact that both DC and Marvel were publishing superheroes named Captain Marvel caused no end of confusion. Eventually, when the DC Universe was rebooted with the New 52 in 2011, Billy Batson's alter ego was rechristened as Shazam. When they revived Captain Marvel in the 1970s, DC licensed the character from Fawcett Publications. In 1991, however, DC made the Shazam family a permanent part of their universe, acquiring the rights to the character outright. At the same time, veteran creator Jerry Ordway was assigned to reboot the character yet again in the pages of a fully painted graphic novel called The Power of Shazam. In addition to retelling Billy Batson's origin, the story also tied him more closely to Black Adam, who had his own civilian identity. Theo Adam, a greedy archaeologist who murdered Billy's parents while on a dig. Released in 1994, The Power of Shazam was an unqualified success and led to the launch of a monthly title of the same name the next year. Ordway would write and provide covers for the series and draw a fair bit of it too. With nearly 50 issues published, it was and is the longest-running Shazam series since 1954. After the DC Universe was rebooted for the New 52, Shazam started appearing as a backup story in the pages of Justice League. In addition to a new costume and a new origin for Dr. Sivana, this version of Billy Batson wasn't quite the wholesome, good-natured kid he'd been in the past. Instead, Jeff Johns and Gary Frank reimagined him as far more bitter and cynical than readers had seen before. The idea was that his initial suspicion and self-interest would give way to a genuine heroism and an affection for his adopted family. There was one other big twist, though. In the pages of Flashpoint, the universe-ending event that led to the New 52 reboot, readers got a glimpse of a version of Shazam who had split his powers among 6 kids. This in itself wasn't a completely new idea. Mary Batson and Freddie Freeman had been turned into Mary Marvel and Captain Marvel Jr. respectively the same way, as had a few other characters all the way back in the Golden Age. This time, though, Billy decided to split his powers not just with Mary and Freddie, but with his foster siblings Darla, Pedro, and Eugene. The result is a whole team of heroes with a much more diverse cast than previous versions of the Shazam family, who will all be appearing alongside each other in the pages of the next Shazam title. It also feels a little reminiscent of a very different superheroic captain.
When the 5 powers combine, they summon Earth's greatest champion, Captain Planet.
Way back in 1941, Captain Marvel made his big screen debut in a Republic Pictures serial, beating Max Fleischer's animated Superman cartoons to the theater by 6 months and predating a live-action Superman serial by 7 years. Now, in 2019, Billy Batson returns to the movies in Shazam. With Asher Angel as Billy Batson, Zachary Levi as Shazam, and Mark Strong as Dr. Sivana, the film sticks pretty close to the 2012 version of the hero. Weirdly enough, while Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson has been attached to the project longer than nearly anyone else, he doesn't appear in Shazam. He's been cast as Black Adam in DC's cinematic universe, but Warner Brothers has announced that they'll be featuring the character in a solo film before he crosses paths with his old nemesis.
We've come up with our own viewing order for the DCEU that we believe does the best job of introducing you to the characters, building the universe, and getting you hyped for what happens next. So take a look at the right order to watch every DC Extended Universe movie. Wonder Woman takes place during World War I, which means that chronologically it's the first film in the DCEU by a good margin. That's not the main reason why we've selected it for our #1 spot though. Wonder Woman is also the best reviewed film in DC's lineup, and when you're beginning a lengthy movie marathon like this, it definitely helps to start off on the right foot. Kicking off with what's arguably the best movie in the series will definitely give you some motivation to keep watching if things get a little rough.
I am above average.
The film also does a great job of introducing Wonder Woman as a character, which will give viewers the solid ground they need to move forward. With her ultra-successful solo film and her status as arguably the best part of both Batman vs. Superman and Justice League, Wonder Woman is the face of the DCEU, so getting her most prominent role right up front makes a lot of sense. Plus, her upbeat attitude and winning combination of hope and courage provides some much-needed light before heading into the grimmer, darker films. Released in 2013, Man of Steel is the film that started the DCEU franchise, but it didn't really do much to build a universe around it. There was no Nick Fury-style post-credit scene to what's essentially a standalone film, but it's still hugely important to watch it early on in your marathon because everything that comes after builds on what happened here. Plus, well, it's the movie that introduces Superman. Clark Kent's alter ego is the most important character in DC's lineup, and his actions here directly influence the rest of the films. In Man of Steel, Superman has a massively destructive battle against fellow Kryptonian General Zod on the streets of Metropolis, and witnessing the level of carnage that results motivates both Batman and Lex Luthor to try and put an end to him in Batman vs. Superman. Plus, the world seeing the true threats that are out there makes them desperate enough to consider the idea of criminal superheroes in Suicide Squad. Man of Steel might have kicked things off, but the movie that really put the universe into the DCEU was Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice, which picked up where Superman's solo outing left off and expanded its scope as fast as it could. Not only does it deal with the fallout from Superman's battle with Zod, it also introduces Batman, Wonder Woman, and through a series of short video clips that's hilariously shoehorned in, the rest of the Justice League too. And just in case that wasn't enough, it throws in the mother boxes too, as the MacGuffins that will later feature heavily in Justice League. In between all the world building are the film's two main conflicts: the eponymous fight between Batman and Superman, and the big showdown between Doomsday and a united front of Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, with Lex Luthor looming in the background of both. While Doomsday is ultimately defeated, Superman is killed in the process, which has major ramifications down the line. Of all the films in the DCEU, Suicide Squad seems like the one you could slide in anywhere. There are brief cameos from Batman and the Flash, but beyond that, there's not much connection to the rest of the universe, and the events of the film are pretty self-contained. Look closer, however, and it's clear that Suicide Squad takes place at a very specific moment. Superman's death in Batman vs. Superman leads to the government getting desperate for a new way to deal with superpowered threats. Someone needs to pick up the slack, and that's where the Suicide Squad comes in. Composed of the kind of deadly criminals like Harley Quinn, Deadshot, and Killer Croc, who have proven they can go toe-to-toe with the superheroes, the team is enlisted to fight the deadliest battles in Superman's absence. The film also ends with Amanda Waller giving Bruce Wayne information on the other heroes, allowing him to assemble the Justice League. And since Superman returns to the land of the living in Justice League, it only makes sense to watch Suicide Squad during the time when he wasn't around. Aquaman came out after Justice League, but it makes a lot more sense to watch it before you get into the DCEU's big team-up. Justice League is at best a flawed movie, with a rushed plot that crams in too many characters to properly introduce, and the tone is all over the place. The film underperformed at the box office and was unpopular with both critics and fans alike, which is probably why Aquaman completely ignores the events of that movie except for one throwaway line. Aquaman was a bona fide blockbuster and the only DCEU movie so far to earn over $1 billion at the worldwide box office. With a sweeping adventure that plays out over big action set pieces, both on land and under the sea, it also does an excellent job of introducing Aquaman to audiences. Much like starting off with Wonder Woman, getting to know Aquaman and his element here makes it much more satisfying to see him again in Justice League. Congratulations, you've made it to Justice League. This was meant to be DC's equivalent to the Avengers, but it simply lacked the build-up that led to its Marvel movie counterpart. The Avengers had the benefit of 2 Iron Man movies, The Incredible Hulk, Thor, and Captain America the First Avenger, all interconnected to introduce its roster of characters and the world around them. Justice League happened much faster, and one of its preceding films, Suicide Squad, was completely unrelated to the others. Watch Aquaman first, however, and you should be geared up to see the established characters join forces in Justice League, even if it means some of the Aquaman scenes in Justice League feel a bit out of order. When you don't have to concentrate on figuring out who all the characters are, it's a lot easier to enjoy the movie on another level. That familiarity with characters from other films is what made the Avengers work so well, and mimicking the formula with this DCEU viewing order will make it a whole lot easier to find the fun in Justice League's over-the-top action. If the grand adventure and bright colors of Aquaman marked a recalibration of the DCEU after Justice League, then Shazam is practically a full-on reboot. There are no characters from any other films, aside from a jokey Superman cameo. Instead, the film uses the idea of a superhero universe as background material to tell its own story. The story is much brighter, much funnier, and much more fun than its predecessors, and also embraces more of the comic book weirdness that made the Marvel movies work so well. The film's post-credits scene even features Mr. Mind, an evil talking caterpillar. It's nearly impossible to imagine something like that happening in the ultra-dark and humorless world we saw in Batman vs. Superman. With the DCEU's upcoming slate composed of more colorful films like the Harley Quinn-led girl gang team-up Birds of Prey, the future of the DCEU looks to be much brighter than what came before. Since Shazam kicks off the DCEU's new era, it's the perfect ending point to the franchise's current lineup.
It'd be the showdown of the century, but could the mighty Atom really take on the Man of Steel? Dwayne Johnson faced an 8-year struggle to bring Black Adam to the big screen. Now Johnson's patience and dedication has paid off. In its first 4 days at the box office, Black Adam brought in $67 million domestically, becoming the best opening weekend performance of any movie with Johnson in the lead role. Notably, the character Johnson portrays, Black Adam, is one of the most powerful in DC Comics. Of course, the biggest buzz behind Black Adam is Superman's brief cameo at the very end of the movie. It's a match made in heaven. In the comic books, both characters possess superhuman strength, speed, hearing, healing, and stamina, but the movie's tease of a showdown between Supes and Mighty Atom has got fans wondering, who will ultimately win when these two juggernauts come to blows in the DCEU?
There's no one on this planet that can stop me.
One critical difference between Superman and Black Adam in the comics is that Adam can discharge lightning bolts as projectiles while engaging his enemies in battle. It might not ever need to come to that though, because Black Adam has an immediate edge over Kal-El. The Mighty Atom's most significant, unique advantage over the last son of Krypton is that he is immortal. Superman seems ageless, but Kal-El does grow older, albeit at a prolonged rate due to the sun's effect on his Kryptonian cells. It might take centuries or even longer, but Clark Kent will eventually succumb to death from natural causes. If a brouhaha between these two super beings ever escalated into a fight, theoretically Black Adam could just wait it out until Superman keels over from old age. Since a millennia-long wait does not make for very good storytelling, however, there must be a more immediate determination of a winner. For his part, Superman can put up one heck of a fight. His debut in Action Comics #1 back in 1938 saw Superman able to leap 1/8 of a mile with skin that could be broken by nothing less than a bursting shell. By contrast, the Superman of more recent days has been seen lifting quintillions of tons single-handed, flying so fast that time moves backward and punching holes in the fabric of reality. Writers have gone back to the Superman loses his powers well so many times that it's become a full-blown trope, mostly because it's hard to write a high-stakes story when your hero can't be beaten, and that might just be where Black Adam comes into play. While everybody knows that Superman is vulnerable to kryptonite, he has another weakness that people often forget about: magic. In Superman #14, the Man of Steel was put under a trance by malevolent fish people. In Superman Volume 2, #49, a piece of magical kryptonite strips him of his powers. In Superman #171, he outright laments that his invulnerability can't protect him from a sorcerer's spell. This brings us to Black Adam. Adam has gone through his own growing pains over the years, but one aspect of his personality has remained solid. His powers are magical in nature.
Did he just catch a rocket? He caught a rocket.
They were given to him by the same wizard who turned Billy Batson into the world's mightiest mortal, and they stem from the abilities of ancient gods. Sometimes Greek, sometimes Egyptian, but always very, very powerful. If Black Adam plans on defeating Superman, he should travel to Smallville, Kansas, where Kal-El's vessel crash-landed on Earth and where he may find Green K kryptonite. Green K is among the most common and powerful iterations of kryptonite because it can weaken and kill the Man of Steel with prolonged exposure. If the mighty Atom wants to take out Superman once and for all, though, there's only one shade of kryptonite he should bother searching for: gold kryptonite. The most formidable weapon Black Adam, or anyone else for that matter, could ever hope to wield against Kal-El, gold kryptonite will permanently strip Superman of all his powers. Black Adam will have to get up close and personal to use it, but gold K is another potential way to victory. With all the advantages Black Adam has over the Man of Steel, the simple truth remains: Superman is stronger. If it comes down to physical combat, the mighty Atom will fall. Even inferior alternate versions of Superman have bested Black Adam in the comic books. In Shazam, Volume 3, Number 14, the evil Superboy Prime easily defeats not only Black Adam, but all the Marvels on his own. And that was the second time Superboy Prime bested the mighty Atom. He also made quick work of him during the Infinite Crisis crossover event. Ultraman, Kal-El's alternate darker half from Earth 3, ended his fisticuffs with Black Adam by breaking his jaw in Forever Evil Number 3. And don't think Superman will have any problem dealing out punishment against his new foe. Kal-El has abandoned his morality on multiple occasions to do what is necessary to save the world and those he loves. In alternate reality, Kal-El slaughtered Wonder Woman in 2004's Superman-Batman Absolute Power, and the Man of Steel wiped out the Joker, Black Canary, Green Arrow, and even Shazam in the far-reaching Injustice saga. Finally, in Man of Steel, the first official installment of the DCEU's big screen adventures, Superman is forced to break General Zod's neck to save a group of civilians. Bottom line, Superman is not above killing. Although Dwayne Johnson put in a lot of work to get Henry Cavill back in the game, the answer to this question is simple. Given the right conditions, Black Adam would best Superman in a fight. Funnily enough, however, Johnson doesn't necessarily agree. In an interview with Jake's Takes, he said, "We will create Black Adam for him to be the most powerful and unstoppable force on this planet. The most powerful and unstoppable force in the entire universe has been on the sidelines for too long. So what's going to happen when Superman and Black Adam finally get their showdown? Looks like we'll just have to wait to find out." The Suicide Squad is, by its very nature, a violent film. The comic books the film is based around center on a task force composed mostly of supervillains, forced against their will by the cold-hearted Amanda Waller to take on missions no one in their right mind would want to do.
I thought you were the crazy one.
Oh, yeah.
Waller's combatants are criminals, not heroes, at least not in the traditional sense, and each of them has an explosive device implanted at the base of their skulls. In other words, even if someone from Waller's Task Force X were to somehow survive their mission, there's still a chance Waller might just pop their head like a grape. James Gunn's latest adaptation of the team, The Suicide Squad, goes all the way on the gruesome and gory nature of the comic book source material. In fact, the entire opening of the film introduces us to a new character named Savant, makes us care about him, connects him with characters fans already know, like Captain Boomerang and Harley Quinn, only to have Waller blow his head off when he flees the mission. In fact, every single character other than Harley and Rick Flag dies during the opening, each death more horrific than the last. In short, when James Gunn says that there was a scene from The Suicide Squad that Warner Brothers thinks went too far when compared with the entire grisly opening, you know it's pretty bad. So what is the one scene Gunn had to fight to keep in the film?
You're supposed to be decisive.
And I've decided that you should eat a big bag of
When Rick Flag is captured after the disastrous first team's beach assault, the second team, led by Bloodsport, is sent on a mission to save Flag. Waller tells Bloodsport that they are to kill the dangerous people holding Flag with extreme prejudice, causing Bloodsport and Peacemaker to go on a competitive bloody rampage as they systematically wipe out everyone in the camp. There's just one problem. Flag isn't a prisoner of war. In fact, he's being cared for by a resistance force fighting to bring peace and freedom to the citizens of Corto Maltese. And that's who Task Force X just killed. Oops. It turns out this was the scene Warner Brothers balked at. When asked if he got any pushback, Gunn told Variety, "Yeah, I did." During an early screening for The Suicide Squad, Gunn said, "There were some Warner Brothers execs who brought up, is this the one place that we go too far? I think that's when I added, Amanda Waller explicitly tells them to go into the camp and kill everyone, so they are following her orders, and she is in a way the antagonist in the film." Based on fan reaction, though, it seems that audiences picked up what Gunn was putting down with the scene. While the scene of Bloodsport and Peacemaker one-upping each other by killing their allies in the Corto Maltesian resistance is certainly a shocking and brutally ironic bit of ultraviolence, that's kind of the point. The Suicide Squad is one of those films where the protagonists aren't necessarily the good guys in the grander scheme of things. A scene like the massacre at the Rebel camp is a way to remind the viewer that while they may be rooting for these characters in the moment, there is a whole lot of moral gray area to contend with. At least, that's how fans on Reddit saw it. In a general discussion thread for the film on the Movies subreddit, several viewers shared their thoughts on the controversial scene. User RazorThought instigated the discussion by writing, "Favorite scene was when the squad is infiltrating the resistance camp and Bloodsport and Peacemaker are trying to outdo each other with flashy kills, just to find out they were accidentally killing the good guys the whole time. That scene was A+. User Keichuya Mewtwo agreed, adding that the scene forces a necessary recalibration in the viewer's perception. They wrote, "Just reminding us that these are villains of our superheroes, ready to do anything for their personal ambitions." For user Arma104, the scene was also indicative of the improvements that the Suicide Squad made over the infamous 2016 attempt at bringing the concept to screen. They wrote, "This is what impressed me most about the movie. The first one was hell-bent on trying to make the characters cool and edgy. This one, they're doing the most vile, evil and are absolute dorks and morons."
We're bad guys. It's what we do.
The Suicide Squad is in theaters and streaming on HBO Max now.
A superhero quoting a warmongering vice president, a hilarious evil dance routine, and perhaps the worst Batman moment of all time. Here are a few times that DC movies made us cringe. It's probably fair to say that Gal Gadot is not exactly recognized as one of her generation's masters of the theatrical arts. Some might argue that's okay. After all, her iteration of Wonder Woman relies on physicality and charisma much more than suspending the audience's disbelief. Indeed, when she does come off as a little disconnected, that actually helps her project a sense of otherworldliness. But every once in a while, Gadot delivers some good old-fashioned bad acting. Her infamous overwrought reprimand of a rampaging Superman in both the 2017 and the 2021 versions of Justice League serves as a case in point. Of course, Wonder Woman's decision to call Superman by his Kryptonian birth name at this point seems odd in itself, seeing as how basically nobody from Earth calls him that. But the real shocker here is Gadot's line read. Both Justice League movies include different takes of Wonder Woman's warning.
Kal-El, no! Kal-El, no!
And neither of them are good. This might suggest that the writers ought to share some of the blame for this particular blunder, but let's face it, Gadot is hardly helping. This is a scene that'll be talked about for decades, but not for the reasons DC once hoped. In 2016's Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice, Batman is about to impale Superman on a kryptonite spear and then...
You're letting him kill Martha!
Him refers to Lex Luthor, who has taken Martha Kent hostage. Martha, as an abstract concept, provides a basis for thoughtful analysis of gender in Zack Snyder's DCEU films. That said, even though her kidnapping provides Superman's motivation at this point, Martha barely seems like she's in this movie at all. Until...
Save Martha!
This cosmic coincidence forces Batman to hesitate, allowing enough time for Lois Lane to show up and explain Luthor's evil plot. And sure, in some parallel universe, there may exist a version of this scene that isn't cringeworthy. After all, the idea does make sense, it's just a shame the execution leaves so much to be desired. When Vice President Dick Cheney left office in 2009, his administration's approval rating had sunk into the low 20s. So should a beloved hero like Batman parrot such a hugely divisive and retired politician? Dawn of Justice seems to think so.
He has the power to wipe out the entire human race, and if we believe there's even a 1% chance that he is our enemy, we have to take it as an absolute certainty.
Somebody clearly thought this quote was so apt that they even included it in the film's trailer. But But folks who remember post-9/11 American politics might notice that Batman borrowed an infamous Cheney quote there, partly verbatim. In 2003, the ex-Veep had said, "If there's a 1% chance that Pakistani scientists are helping Al-Qaeda build or develop a nuclear weapon, we have to treat it as a certainty in terms of our response." This argument was used by Cheney in 2003 as justification for the US invasion of Iraq. Here, Batman vs. Superman puts a widely disliked man's words about a wildly unpopular war in the mouth of one of the most popular heroes in all of fiction. Whatever the intent for the purpose of the story, it feels like a serious misfire. Though it's never stated outright, it's very heavily implied that, in Batman vs. Superman, Lex Luthor pees in a jar and leaves it on a podium as a final screw you to Senator June Finch. This happens just moments before a suicide bomber kills her along with an entire courtroom of people. Doesn't this seem a little juvenile and crass, even for Jesse Eisenberg's bizarre take on Luthor? Based on his mannerisms and background, this version of Luthor scans like a combination of Eisenberg's performance in The Social Network and a mediocre screenwriter who once made a YouTube fan film about Superman. Even still, you can't help but wonder if the movie version of Mark Zuckerberg would have come up with a more elegant and sophisticated way to mess with Senator Finch's brain before blasting her to smithereens. He did invent Facebook, after all. The version of Jonathan Kent portrayed by Kevin Costner in Man of Steel is a man who loves farming and hates rescuing people when they're in trouble. This makes him a somewhat non-traditional interpretation of Clark Kent's foundational male role model who, in other takes on the Superman myth, tends to gently push Clark in a more pro-saving people direction. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. The moment when famously invincible Clark Kent stands by and watches his adopted dad run into a raging tornado to rescue the family dog, only to predictably die horribly, is very cringy. Obviously, Superman could rescue his paw and the pooch very quickly and with minimal effort, but instead he just stands there and does this. And if you think that's bad, wait until you hear Superman's cry of exhausted anguish immediately after offing Zod at the end of the movie. But hey, maybe this is just how Superman reacts to bad stuff. Missed the bus? Colors ran in the wash. Out of milk? Poor old Clark Kent just can't catch a break. Barbara Minerva is one of the most glaring missed opportunities in Wonder Woman 1984. There have been a few different versions of Cheetah in the comics, but the baseline of Barbara can be summarized as the answer to the question, what if Indiana Jones was an evil flesh-eating jungle cat? But instead of a physical and mental match for an immortal Amazon princess, Wonder Woman 1984 coughs up an awkward nerd who loses her mind when she gets powers, in the mold of some of Joel Schumacher's Batman villains. When Barbara and Diana meet, Barbara's deeply envious of Diana because something to do with her self-esteem. Even though Barbara is also a conventionally attractive woman with a fancy archaeology career that presumably pays very handsomely indeed. Still, at least she looks good in her cheetah form. The general consensus on the two versions of Justice League is that Zack Snyder's revamped version of the movie released in 2021 is a step up from the 2017 theatrical cut. But that doesn't mean the so-called Snyder Cut is totally free of cringeworthy moments. Take, for instance, the whole deal with Martha Kent and Lois Lane. After Ma Kent finishes telling Lois Lane that she can't grieve over Superman's death forever, Martha leaves the apartment, then suddenly transforms into John Jones, also known as the Martian Manhunter. Jones, in his DCEU debut, then transforms again into General Calvin Swanwick, who you may remember from Man of Steel. Martian Manhunter never interacts directly with any Justice League members until well after the major events of the film have wrapped up, He comes across as totally unconnected to the plot and feels shoehorned in for the purpose of showing the audience yet another familiar intellectual property. Furthermore, he raises some befuddling questions the film never addresses. For one, was Harry Lennox, who plays General Swanwick, playing John Jones all the way back in Man of Steel, or did John replace that guy at some point? That's not the only problem with this scene either. Setting aside whether you accept the idea that Lois would completely fall apart after Superman's demise, the kind of serious clinical depression she is suffering from isn't the sort of thing that gets resolved by a pep talk from your almost mother-in-law. All in all, a decent scene for fan service, but not so much for anything else. In one of the most talked about additions to Justice League's 2021 Snyder Cut, the film's plot flashes forward to a potential future, one in which Batman and a cohort of costume pals wander through a Mad Max-style wasteland. It soon becomes clear that this gang includes the Joker, played by Jared Leto, reprising his Suicide Squad role. A subsequent conversation between Batman and the Joker dumps the exposition of their relationship. Basically, Batman can never kill the Joker because they complete each other, or something. It's the usual song and dance, but then Joker says this.
You don't want to kill me. I'm your best friend. Besides, who's gonna give you a reach around?
Oh boy, that's right. This ain't your grandpa's Joker. This one is dark and scary and kinda homophobic too. Eat your heart out, Zach Galifianakis. And sure, some folks like the Joker stuff and Zack Snyder's Justice League, all power to them, but you'd also be forgiven for thinking it plays like a 13-year-old read The Killing Joke, saw The Dark Knight, and then decided to write a Batman Joker scene that was the edgiest thing to ever have an edgy night in Edgeville. Of course, the scene also makes basically no sense and adds nothing to the larger context of the movie, but it is at least noteworthy for its vindication of Joel Schumacher, who is no longer responsible for the worst Batman moment of all time. Thanks to the runaway success of James Gunn's 2021 The Suicide Squad, the David Ayer-directed original Suicide Squad is likely to fade away into obscurity. Still, we'll always have the memories, like these early promotional stills for the film that set Jared Leto up to fail miserably as a successor to Heath Ledger's turn as the Clown Prince of Crime. Before you realized what you were looking at, you might have been forgiven for wondering why Ayer had chosen to promote his Suicide Squad movie with that guy who got kicked out of the mall for taking his shirt off in Spencer's. Or maybe you wondered why Jared Leto had started a metalcore band. But then the horrible truth dawned. Oh man, that's supposed to be the Joker. It wasn't a great moment. Here's a fun fact for you. Belly dancing is not intimidating. If you have ever been to a belly dancing demonstration, you'll notice that the performers in no way intend to frighten the audience. So when the minds behind Suicide Squad needed something for Enchantress to do to indicate that some evil as heck magic was taking place, why did they land on this? It's clear that somebody at Warner Brothers thought audiences would react better to a runway model dancing in her underwear rather than, say, anything that actually made sense. But this is Suicide Squad's main antagonist, someone who is supposed to be a big bad reality-destroying supervillain. Shouldn't she be doing anything more disturbing than shaking her hips to some medium-quality CG effects? Honestly, Enchantress's whole deal in Suicide Squad feels like somebody in charge was working overtime to appeal to the teenage male segment of the audience, which would explain what they did to Harley Quinn, too. Thanks to the advancement of science and technology, it's more or less common amongst human beings to carry around what is essentially a computer in their pockets. Amazing, right? And yet, Hollywood still seems unable to edit one mustache off one guy in one movie. Back in 2017, a tragic family emergency forced original director Zack Snyder to leave the production of what became the theatrical cut of Justice League. The now notorious Joss Whedon took over from there to basically nobody's satisfaction. By the time the Whedon-helmed reshoots began, however, Henry Cavill had grown a mustache for his part in Mission Impossible Fallout. This meant that the Justice League special effects team had to digitally erase Cavill's facial hair in post-production. By the time Justice League hit theaters, the extensive reshoots and digital edits had been widely reported in the media, so it's hard to say if anyone would have noticed the change if they weren't looking for it. Sadly, it happened to be the case that everybody was, in fact, looking for a digitally altered upper lip that came straight out of Bizarro World. As a result, everybody did notice it, and the ensuing laughter could be heard all around the world.